Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Yvonne coatigan sew along. So last time we got to the point where we'd done the collar and now we're at the point where we're going to put the sleeves in. I have done a little bit of extra prep work so that the video can move on a little bit more quickly throughout this, but I will show you every step as we go, but and explain what I have done. So basically the next stage is to put the sleeve in. So the sleeve goes in flat, so you need to make sure you've got the sleeve head marked, which I did have. I can't see it in this fabric. If you can't find it with this sleeve, it's just folding it in half and it's the centre there. So let me just do a little nick again to make that a little bit deeper. So that is the centre of the sleeve head, and that needs to go to the shoulder seam. So I'm going to pin that part first. I have already stitched the other sleeve in, so I'm just going to be able to move on. So this pins in, like I said, flat, so you should be able to match up the seam of the underarm seam here, side seam, with the end of the sleeve. So I'll try and show you that a little bit more clearly in a second when I've got it pinned in. So it's nice and simple. There we go. So can you see we've got the sleeve, we've got the shoulder seam there, and this is the armhole going over there. So all we're going to do now is just stitch from one end to the other, and then I'm going to overlock that just to neaten it. So let's start by doing that. Okay. Sleeve head in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and overlock this together. While I'm there, I'm also going to overlock, no actually, no I'm not. I'm just going to overlock that at this moment in time, and then I shall be back. So what I've done is I've just literally overlocked that seam. I've overlocked the two seams together, so the sleeve seam and the actual seam of the garment. I've overlocked those together and pressed them towards the sleeve, so they're going in towards the sleeve. So what we're going to do now is, oh actually while I was there, the other thing I did was, in preparation for hemming the sleeve, is I've just overlocked across the end of the sleeve. So this is the part that will go around here, just to make it easier while it's flat rather than working on a circle. So the next thing I'm going to do is pin the underarms, so the sleeve, pin it all the way through from the cuff down to or the sleeve end down to the hem. So I'm going to pin that now, and then we'll stitch it. I'll hopefully show you a little bit clearer in a second. So match up your underarm point at this stage. Pin all the way down there, and like I said, all the way to the hem. So that's, what can you see? So we've stitched, so we're going all the way from here down, all the way to the bottom. So I'm going to stitch that now and then overlock it to finish it, and then basically do the same on the other side. You just need to pivot slightly at the armhole. So I'm just going to go and overlock that now, and then I'll be back to show you the facing. So now we've got the underarm seams stitched and overlocked, and what I have done now is I have partly prepared the neck facing, because a lot of it I can explain rather than you watching me say lots of straight lines. So what I've done is I've pinned the facing on to the neck edge, matching the centre back neck edge there, and then stitching all the way down. It's probably a little bit easier to see because you can see on the interfacing, and then going round the corner. So I've measured up 3 centimetres and stitched across here, across the lower front edge, and then all the way up around the whole of the neck edge to the other edge, and done the same on the bottom that side. So then what I need to do now is trim this, because this is quite a bulky seam, and then we're going to understitch. So I've partly started to trim this. So I like to trim on the side of the facing, because the understitching is going to be, it's key to stitch the actual seam to the facing. So I like to have the slimmer seam sandwiched between those two, because you just basically, with this, you want to reduce bulk. If it was a lighter fabric, say like a French terry like this is, I may not even trim that. It might be sort of light enough not to worry. The other thing, you can trim away the interfacing, but I'll just trim the rest of this to show you, and then we'll do the understitching. So I've got to the centre back neck. The other thing is, you will find the centre back neck of the facing piece is slightly narrower than the neck, the collar rather, on the actual garment, and the reason why that is just to pull it in slightly so it doesn't sit proud at the neck edge. So that is correct. If you're wondering why that's like that, it will all make sense when it's made. So I'm just going to carry on trimming along there. And this bit's kind of falling away, so it's quite a good opportunity to get rid of that bit as well. We just want to reduce some of the bulk so the edge isn't too thick. And when you get to the lower edge, you want to trim this piece off as well to a seam allowance. Allow a little bit extra on this, and then trim away the corner just to, again, to reduce bulk. So you've got something along those lines at the lower edge. Just finish that little bit here. I would also say at this point, it's before you trim, it's worth just turning it through and checking that you've got that that it's hanging properly, because sometimes it can distort a little bit. So I've trimmed that, and now I'm going to turn the facing through and press. I'm just going to press this edge in so it's nice and sharp, and just check that it is hanging correctly at the front before we start understitching, because you can still go back and unpick this if it's sort of not hanging straight. So just check this is nice and flat, and then we're going to come back and understitch this. So I'll go and press that and be back in a moment. Right, I've pressed that and I've checked it and it all seems fine. So the next thing to do is to start from the lower edge, and we're stitching onto the actual facing piece. So it's a bit difficult to see which piece I'm working on, but this is the facing, and the key thing is to make sure the seam is laying onto the facing. So when you start stitching, I like to have my finger behind and make sure that the seam here is always in the line of the stitching, because if it pushes the other way, it's not going to have any effect at all. It needs to be pushed so that the seam is being stitched to the facing. And the other thing here is you won't be able to start all the way at the very end, at the very corner. You'll have to start somewhere up here, but that doesn't matter. The key thing is you're getting the neck facing to sit neatly inside by doing this stitching. So you want to be stitching around about 2 or 3 mil away. Like with this fabric, it's going to sort of just blend in, but you don't want to be unachievably close to the actual seam, because it'll start to encroach on the inside or won't do anything. But you don't want to be too far that you're going off the edge of the seam. So 2 or 3 mil, about 3 mil on this fabric, I'd say. So we're going to start here, go all the way to the other side, always constantly making sure that that seam is in our line of stitching. So I'm around about 6 centimetres up from the corner. So there we have it. We've understitched all the way around there, and it just helps the neck sit, the neck facing sit nicely inside. So again, we'll press that now, but the last thing to do on the neck is just to lift the collar, the facing up, and then take the 2 seams, so not the centre seam, the seam that joins the facing to the neck and the back to the neck. So you've got this one in the middle and this one here, and basically what we're going to do is just, with this fabric I'm going to do it by hand, so I'm just going to stitch the 2 edges together, so with the seams sandwiched upwards. I'm going to pin it to start with, and that will just help keep the collar in the right place. So match your centre seams and check they're matched nicely before you sandwich up, and then pin across, and then we can just stitch that by hand, and that will help that sit nice and flat at the back neck edge. So I'm just going to hand stitch that now, and then before you can trim up any bits and pieces, and before you leave the collar, lay the neck facing flat and just stitch by hand the neck facing, catch it to the seam here, and that will just make that, you know, stop from popping out all the time. So just keep that nice and flat, and then your collar's finished. So I've stitched that together. Literally all it is a long kind of running stitch to stitch that together. It's just to sandwich the 2 so that the collar here sits up and doesn't just sort of flop into nothingness. I'll do the facings at the end. You don't really need to me to show you that. So the last thing we've got to do is the hem, the cuff hems and the pockets. And because this is the wraparound pocket, that's why they're left to the end. So I'll show you that in a second, but I'm just going to prepare the pockets. But if you had done the angled pockets or the small patch pockets, they would have been already applied. So for the large pocket, the large wraparound pocket, I've started to prepare this. So I've overlocked this edge and I've stitched along, turned right sides down and stitched down here, so that you're ready to make that into a turning. So I'm just going to trim the corners so it's easier to turn that at that point on both sides, and then I'm going to turn this through, and we need to press this. So we need to press along here, press the sides in so that your pocket is ready to apply to the the garment when it's finished. You can either leave this, so sometimes I don't mind leaving this unstitched because it's not really going to go anywhere, but you can also just stitch across there if you want to have a finished top to your pocket. So I'll go off and press that, and then we'll be ready to put that onto the garment, which I'll show you in a second. The last thing to do before applying the pockets is, like I said, to sew the hem. So while I was doing the hand stitching, I just overlocked the edge of the hem. So before turning that through, if you just overlock along the hem, and then when you've turned this up, I mean, I don't like to do a double turned hem, especially on something as thick as this, because it's way too bulky. So then the last thing to do is to stitch from the very edge here all the way across to the other side. But again, I would just check this at this point and check that this is hanging nicely, because that is something that can go a little bit wrong, especially if it's stretched as you stitched here. So it's really key to keep this nicely pinned and relaxed as you stitch it. So I'm going to stitch all the way through the hem, and then I could do the same on the cuff. So it's just a single turn hem. We'd already done the overlocking, so you're just literally turning it up and stitching it. I've used quite a deep hem, so this is 3 centimeters deep, because I think it just looks a little bit more substantial. So I'm going to go and stitch that now, and then we'll go on to applying the pockets. Like I said, we'll do the cuffs, but I won't do that on camera because it's just the same really. We're just turning that in. You can pre-press this before you sew the underarm seams if you like, just to make it a little bit simpler. And then you probably need to put the garment inside, put the foot down inside the sleeve and sort of go round like a hamster in a wheel, because it's going to be too small probably to get over the bar, but check on your machine depending on the size you're making as well. So now I'm going to go off and show you how to put the pocket that I will press and put that onto the garment, and then we'll stitch that and your garment will be finished. So this is the final part of this particular pocket version of the Yvonne coatigan. Like I said, if you'd made the one with the angled pockets or with the smaller patch pockets, the pockets would already have been applied, but because this larger pocket overlaps the side seam, which is here, we need to finish the whole garment before you put the pockets on. So I've got my tailor tacks here, the hem's been stitched, and now I'm going to pin it in place just over the side seam to start with, and then before I stitch it, I'm going to measure it all, and I'm also going to tack it. And the reason I'm tacking this fabric is it's because it's so bulky. It will move and distort and be a little bit tricky to manage, so I think it's really worth tacking fabric when it's like this. In fact, I'm going to put pins in like this so that I can manoeuvre them a little bit more easily. So even though I've got my tailor tacks there and I've placed them to it, I like to double check the measurements on both sides. So I'm going to check one side. Let me get my tape measure. So I'm going to start, we basically want it really running parallel with the front. You'd want that. I think it does actually angle up a little bit here. So I'll do it in inches so it's easier to see. So we've got 6 inches at the top there. And you see we've got nearly 6.5 inches there. So I need to move this over a little bit. I'm leaving this pin at the top there to pivot from. So let's put a pin in there. Some fabrics will be easier to see, but this is such a bulky fabric that it blends in so well that it's quite tricky to to see. So I think that's going to be a little bit better. And what I'll do before I stitch both sides is I'm just going to go and check that the other side is measuring 6 inches. Well, like I said, you can see we're quite close to the hem line there, so it's better to stitch the hem first as well. Just do this as the final thing. So I'm happy with that now. That's nice and equal there. So I'm going to go ahead and tack this on. I'm going to do the other side, and then once I'm happy that they're both the same measurements and the same measurement up on the other side as well, so they're nice and symmetrical, I'll go ahead and stitch them. So let me tack this on and then we'll go back to the machine. The other thing I would say here is don't try to be too, if you are using a bulky fabric like this, don't try and be too close to the edge, because it becomes slightly unachievable and will actually look more messy. You're probably better to come in around about, not quite as much as a centimetre, but I think it looks a bit neater if you're a nice sharp line around there that isn't too close to the edge, because it tends to pop off the edge as well, the foot, and makes it a bit awkward to stitch. But let's give this a bit of a tack round. Just make sure you catch in those corners, because they're likely to poke out as you go around, especially again with bulkier fabrics. Just about running out of thread there, but I might just do it. Alright, so I can take the pins out now. And go ahead and sew that. So we've got the prepared pocket, and the last thing to do now is just to stitch that in place on both pockets, and then we have a finished garment. So just where you start and finish, make sure you reinforce with some back stitch, because obviously there's a fair bit of tension at the top of the pocket with your hand going in and out. So I'm just going to go backwards a couple of times. I'm just going to stitch one pocket on, and I'll stitch the other pocket off camera. So stitch pockets, I'm going to do the same on the other side, and then the whole garment is complete. I still need to hand stitch down my facing to the shoulder seams, but that's literally just catch it lightly, not so that you can see it on the outside, just so that it attaches to that seam, and then give it a good press, and you have a finished coatigan. There we go. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoy the pattern, and see you again soon.